My name is Tal Kitron. I'm a premium tutor and executive function coach with Outbrook Tutoring Services. And I've been with the company for about a decade at this point. And today we're going to be talking about supercharging executive function strategies. So whether that's you, if you're a student, or often we've got parents or guardians tuning in, should just give you some strategies for these upcoming few weeks and then the final exams themselves. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will answer those at the end. As I said, I do test prep and executive function coaching. We also offer academic tutoring. What I want to start with today is what executive functions are. So a lot of people just don't know. It's a relatively new term. This is something that I've learned about in the past few years and think it's really groundbreaking. Just to know what they are and to understand that we can develop them. So EF, executive functions, are processes that are necessary for behavior control. That means self-management and managing your own resources, setting goals, and then enacting and monitoring behaviors that help you achieve those goals. So instead of being reactive or impulsively acting, we're organizing, planning ahead, and thinking through solutions in advance. And again, these are skills that we all have, and they can be developed, improved over time, and they're in a spectrum. So not everyone will have the same level of EF skills. And someone who's very, very strong at planning in advance may not be as good at self-regulating and self-monitoring when the time comes, or vice versa. Those of you who are, a lot of people are taking AP exams last week and this week. So these are definitely skills that can help on those tests. They can help on final exams, but they also just help in life and in other areas outside of school. They naturally develop as we grow older, but they can be coached to be developed even more efficiently. Some of the skills, the more advanced skills that we'd be looking at developing. So of course, planning and prioritizing, right? Which tests are going to be the most important and how far to plan ahead. We're going to look at just how to do that and think about some ways that maybe will spark some new strategies. And then initiating tasks, but also persisting and completing tasks. So all those go into time management. And then really the cornerstone of EF is metacognition. That is thinking about how we think. So if with a coach or just with working on your own EF skills solo, if you can develop a better understanding of why you think certain ways and how you think the way you think and what the things you do, why you do them, that can really unlock other skills. So if we become more metacognitive, we become better at the other things like planning, time management, etc. When you think about finals, just like SAT or ACT or any big project or test, we want to think about future self and make the future sketch. So you take this test date, right? Let's say we've got a final on May 28th, and that's the big one. We're going to plan backwards from that test. So what am I doing the couple days before so that I can get good night's sleep? And really, what am I doing the week before and the week before that? If you know it's going to be a short answer test and there's going to be multiple choice, but also essays, you want to take that time to actually rehearse that step of writing the essay, right? If I see a question, not only do I feel like, yes, I know how to answer that, but maybe we actually generate a response for practice. That's difficult stuff. And it really all boils down to being proactive and not reactive. So we're going to look at I think a lot of people, especially at the age of 10th, 11th, 12th grade, are not great at planning ahead and are very reactive and procrastinate a lot. So we'll just look at some ways to get better at that. For this round of exams, you don't only want to think about what has been a challenge in the past, but you also want to think about what's worked well. So reflection on how, let's think about the last time I took a final exam and it went really well. What strategies worked? Which ones didn't? What might I do again and what might I ditch for next time? And what might I try to bring in? What strategies might be helpful that I didn't use last time? Right, so very important. We can all just be self-reflective about what's worked and what hasn't in the past. And in doing that, we'll probably uncover patterns. Right, it's always important to focus on positive visualization and positive experiences. But then when you're developing skills, generally, you also need to think about what went wrong, right? What gives me trouble? What are my obstacles? And the things you think about are we needing to change like the way I prepare or where I am, or how long I'm prepping for at a time? We'll talk about building in break time. Is this something where you go into tests feeling super overconfident and then the scores come back and it's like, oh no, I thought I did better? Or are we not as confident as we could be and maybe a boost in confidence would help? Or are you pretty good at understanding, yeah, I didn't do great, right? And that's in line with what your grades are. We just need to think about those patterns and then be willing to shift and adapt, right? It can be hard to break the mold, but if those patterns aren't working, in just a very consistent way, we might need to shift and try something different. Something that we should all do is set goals. So a lot of students, they have this kind of vague goal in mind of, well, I know my grade's not great. I don't want it to get worse and I want it to get a bit better. But we should actually be more specific with that, especially on finals, right? Thinking about what is your goal for a grade in this class? What's your GPA goal overall, right? Be realistic, but we want to set high goals. And then that's going to motivate us to work to achieve them. Here's an example. So let's say my goal, this is junior year, and it's spring semester, I'm trying to get an A or a B in every class. And just looking at what we've got, I mean, I've got a high B in world history, so that's high priority, right? I can boost it to an A if I do really well in the final. Environmental science, I mean, I'm great at that class. I don't need to do that much. I just need to not bomb the final. So low priority, right? Not going to totally neglect it, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. Honors algebra, I want to make sure that I don't drop down to a C. So it'll be medium priority. And then Spanish would be high priority because that's right on the cusp of becoming a C, right? So I need to get a B or better on the final. Those are the kind of things where I might go and talk to the teacher before the final too and say, hey, is there anything I can do to boost this, right? Make it clear that you are motivated and trying to boost your grade. So we're going to talk a little bit about prioritization. Sometimes it's more obvious than others. And other times you need to just break it down a little bit to figure out what really is highest priority for me right now. This week, a lot of people are dealing with that with like 3 AP exams plus regular schoolwork. If that's the case, then you need to figure out where do my priorities lie and when do I study for each test. Maybe one of them in the middle of the week we feel confident about and don't need to spend as much time on. That'd be great. We can dedicate it to the other tests. Maybe AP calculus is super important, right? I really need a 4 or a 5, right? And that's going to take more work. So maybe that's going to be a priority for us. It's going to be different based on the person in the setting. But you want to treat everything separately, right? So break it down into little parts. When we're coaching students, there's no task too simple, right? Break it down a lot. Think about for each little task, how am I going to study? Do I have all the resources I need? Then schedule when you're going to study, ideally on a Google Calendar, or there's other resources we'll look at. You can just have your assignments live in a certain place in Binder. A lot of people struggle with how much time things will take. They're not good at estimating that. That comes with experience, but I think we really need to think about, do I need to set aside an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours? Should I come back the next day if I do like 2 hours one day? Just planning ahead is really important. That's key before you start reviewing. A lot of people start reviewing finals and aren't doing it in the most efficient way. This also impacts motivation. So we're setting goals. People aren't going to be motivated if they're not working towards something fairly specific, right? So like, hey, I'm aiming for a 96 on this final. That's my goal. If we don't get it, that's not the end of the world, right? It's just, I want to know in advance what I'm preparing for, right? So as I prep for battle, right, on test day, how many questions can I miss and still get this grade? Maybe I'm doing a couple practice tests and making sure that I'm on the path to that, right? That's big for SAT, ACT, of course, is mock tests to see, are we getting nearer to our score goal along the way? Same thing with prepping for finals. One Herman Ebbinghaus conducted a little, I guess, self-experiment. And he wanted to learn and kind of get some more data about what happens when we review something once for a longer time versus reviewing it over several days and weeks and just distributing that review. You might not be surprised to learn that more frequent review leads to more retention. Here was the study that he did. When he studied for something and then didn't reinforce it, right? So he learned about some sort of new topic to him. He found that if he just learned it one time and it didn't reinforce, that it would decay very quickly. After about a week, it was 75% out of his brain. We've all experienced that, right? Learning things and then forgetting them as other knowledge comes in. But then when he decided, okay, I'm going to study 3 times in 3 days, I'm going to distribute this, and maybe even if he studied less time in a day, that reinforcement and that distribution helped him remember what he did. His working memory was much better, and it stayed in his head for much, much longer than the initial study. Every time he reviewed, that increased the strength of his memory over time. So just you learn it, and then you take a little break, and then you relearn it, and maybe you do it again. Some ways to preserve information that people don't know or think about. Naps are wonderful. A lot of people can't take naps. I inherited from my father a great napping ability, and 10, 20, 30-minute nap can really do wonders. It's also amazingly, if you learn something and then you just kind of go to sleep, take a little nap, it can actually lead to more retention. We're going to talk about interference theory in a moment. And interference breaks, when they're the good kind, are important, right? And sleep, or going for a walk, or exercise are all actually quite good interference breaks. They can help you actually cement what you just learned. When I was many years ago, when I was in law school, I would stay up pretty late. But then if I stayed up all night, I always realized that I wouldn't do well the next day, right? I didn't function well on no sleep. Plus, by like 1 or 2 a.m., the words were bouncing around on the page. So at midnight or 1, I'd go to sleep for a few hours, wake up 3 or 4 a.m., and then was much more able to get done what I needed to. Fairly unorthodox, I think, but that's what worked for me. You got to figure out what works best for you. I think some people falsely believe that they're best at night because they procrastinate. And so I have a lot of students who are like, oh, I do my best work like right before it's due, late at night. And for some people, that's super true. But for others, that's just because you have no other option. So what we need to think about is, when am I at my best? Am I really not a morning person? In that case, we're not going to do tutoring in the morning or coaching, and I probably won't tackle my harder subject in the morning. If I know I need a nap in the afternoon, then maybe I do a little bit of work before nap, cement some of that, and then do a little more afterwards on something else. Right? So just understanding when you need breaks and what kind of breaks work for you. There's a few schools of thought on this. So the 50-10 rule we'll mention, the Pomodoro technique. I would say every 30 to 45 minutes, you need to take a break. And when I was teaching in a classroom, I would never teach something for more than 15 or 20 minutes. Like, I'm even conscious that a presentation for an hour, people are going to fade in and out of consciousness or attention, just because we're talking about the same thing-ish for a long period of time. Our attention wanes. But some people really do well with like a fidget spinner, or others need to just be active, right? Like walking around, just a quick break, sipping some water. Those little breaks when we're studying can help the glucose stores replenish, and it really does do wonders. You're better off taking short breaks and coming back, as long as you don't get super distracted. But going like an hour, 2 hours at a time is too much. I've been working with a lot of students who I'm coaching on using their phone and just the stopwatch lap function, right? You hit a stopwatch, and then when you like move it to the next task, you can hit lap, so you can see exactly how long it took. Then you take a break and you hit the stopwatch again to monitor yourself. So you're not taking a 45-minute break, you're taking 15 or 20 minutes. If you know that gaming is a time suck, and if you take a break and start a game, you're going to be there for an hour or more, then you've got to control that. And instead, on your break, it's walk the dog, get a snack, read a book, check the news, maybe even do a quick social media visit, but not something that you know is going to suck you in. So we have to have boundaries and structure. I mentioned the interference theory. I'm moving a little bit quickly today just because there's a lot to cover. So if there are questions, again, just we'll get to them at the end. But this has to do with that if you take a nap after you learn, it can help you cement information. Our mind is, there's always competition between new information coming in and old information, right? And so like some old information just sticks, like childhood phone numbers that I remember versus maybe people's birthdays that go out of your mind, right? And in school, right, even from freshman year, a lot of people have forgotten geometry because they learned so much algebra and calculus since then. So in general, we can only handle so much at one time. There are ways to break things up into chunks so that we can keep more in our working memory and just work less hard. A lot of this is about building a system so that it does the work for us. The other way this works is, and again, when I was in a classroom teaching SAT, we would go 15 minutes on a math topic, but then right away it's like, we got to switch, whether that's do a worksheet or do something different. I'm not lecturing on that topic for more than about 15, 20 minutes. We need to switch. And then after about 40 minutes, we're switching from math to reading. And it seems counterintuitive. A lot of people want to focus on one thing at one time, but honestly, you're better off, instead of doing long blocks of studying for a final exam, do a few short blocks of studying for 3 finals and do the same thing the next day. So mix it up a little bit. Don't always go in the same order, right? Maybe you need to go like start in the beginning sometimes, then start in the middle or end. And do understand the challenge with more breaks and switching topics does mean more stops and starts. So sometimes that'll be tough. We just have to hold ourselves accountable to not get distracted and inhibit those distractions. So if you learn 2 things that are super similar, more interference. If you learn math and then history, a lot of times there's less interference and they're both more likely to stick. I mentioned taking a walk, even looking at pictures of nature can be calming. And I mean, like I see that, I get that. What we need is to just reset our attention system. That's why you can't focus in on something for hours at a time. So exercise and natural breaks are, of course, the best if you have that opportunity. Some people also need to study in different spots. So if you're only studying for your AP history exam in one place, are we sure that as soon as I move to the living room, it doesn't go away, right? Some people need to go to different spots and then they're better able to retrieve that information later because it's not just tied into, oh, me at my desk at home. Because we've all had those moments of trying to remember something and being like, man, okay, I know where I was when I learned this, but we just can't quite grasp it. So move around, get more cues. Some people do well in the library, maybe just even switching rooms in the house or going outside if it's nice, right? Different options. And speaking of where you're studying, you want to make sure that it's decluttered. And you want to decrease possibility of off-task behavior. So if you know you're going to go on phone or the internet, maybe you keep your phone on the other side of the house or put it in airplane mode, right? Or use some blockers for certain, there's apps that can block certain like websites if you know they're going to be distracted. Same with gaming, right? If you know that you're going to be doing that, it just has to be off limits, right? When you're studying. Build in time. We'll talk about building in time for play and work and separating those. But we want to make sure that when we are working, we've got a very clean, neat, disciplined environment so that you can rely on that and it's not always a slog to get yourself to do it. Don't want to rely upon our own willpower. We want to rely upon just, this is where I work. This is my work setting. I'm in work mode here. Should be easier that way. Some students' rooms look kind of like this, which is always stressful. Students definitely do better in less cluttered learning environments. We got to both declutter analog, so in real life, but also digitally. So you can see here, this is what I mean by digital declutter. But then also minimizing distractions, right? So while I do think switching around is good, we do want to have a regular study area that can be a go-to. And then if you're realizing something's not clicking, you might just need to go different spots for that one test or that one topic. Chewing gum helps for some people. Music's fine as long as there aren't lyrics. Some people do fine with that too. The big one is the phone is the distraction. It's so easy to get sucked in, right? Even just by an email or a text. So notifications, just silencing those could make a difference. And so other than notifications, like, do we have a million emails in our inbox? Do we have all these tabs open, right? Is there anything we can just turn off and deactivate when we're trying to really study and work hard? All that stuff, decluttering and discipline, will help inhibit those distractions. Here are some helpful blockers at the bottom. I just had Jed, actually, the founder of Alpharuth, who gave this presentation, I think last year, recommended stay focused. He said he uses that in an email today. Helps him stay off of certain like word games or news websites if he really needs to be working. And just think about it and be honest with yourself. Where do I go to waste time? Try to make those paths a little bit more difficult and less well-worn. There's a difference between interference and interruption, right? So like an interference would be intentionally going for a walk or napping to cement some information and just take a cognitive break. An interruption is something else interrupting our thinking and our train of thought that is just hijacking, right? So like if I go and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there's this basketball game on that I want to watch, that could distract me. Or I'm on Snapchat now or Instagram or whatever, that could distract as well. And then people try to multitask. That generally doesn't work, right? 2.5% of people can multitask, and the rest of us are monotaskers, one at a time, right? So yes, maybe lyricless music could be okay, but most other things, you just got to eliminate those distractions. And that's why taking breaks can help. Instead of saying, I'm going to sit down for 5 hours and work, I'm going to do 30 to 45 minutes and then take my first break. Much more manageable. This is important, I think, in life as well, is just when you're doing something, just do that. So like I even find myself, I'm eating breakfast, but I'm also like on the phone, watching highlights or looking at news stories from the previous day. And ultimately it's stressful, right? When you are just having a meal, sitting down, just do that. When you are working, just do that. But then you do need to set aside time for friends and play. And a lot of juniors are kind of scoffing because any free time is used for sleep. But I do think there are times, whether it's sports or music or plays or dances or things on the weekends, that are crucial just to keep that work play boundary and to make sure that you're not just getting drained, right? Burnout's a real thing this time of year. Good quality work time, but also good quality fun time. And again, we mentioned this, but make what's easy hard and what's hard easy. So if you know that you're always going to go to the phone, put it in airplane mode, turn it off, right? Think about, for what isn't easy, how can we make it easier? That's a big part of coaching. And the goal of a coach is really to pass that off to the student and make them kind of own it over time. Many of us are procrastinators, whether we are serious procrastinators or light procrastinators. One big thing, if you are and want to deal with that, is being honest again about what's your style. Why are we doing it? Are we setting up obstacles for ourselves? And if so, like, why? What's my resistance to starting the task? Or is it a resistance to finishing? Some people do great with task initiation, but aren't persistent. Some people do great with self-rewards. If I finish this, I can have this snack. Or if I don't finish this, then I can't play video games or I can't go be with my friends. And I think different people do, if it's a coaching thing, you always want to do rewards, carrot better than stick. But if it's someone dealing with themselves, it depends on the person. You may do better with a punishment system for not doing something. But yeah, know yourself and think about and try it, see what works. And then when we're prioritizing, don't save the hardest thing for last. You want to always check things off. Every little thing is a win, and that's progress. And then reward yourself by saving the easiest things for last. Something students are not great at is seeking help. Here are some ways to seek help, especially over the next few weeks as final exams approach. As a a former in-school teacher, I always, and not all teachers are the same, right? I always appreciated when a student came up and said, "Is there anything I can do to improve my grade?" Right? And it was always, it's the best is if you take your own accountability, right? Say, "Hey, my goal is to raise this from this to that." Uh, Take accountability. If maybe there was an assignment you didn't turn in, can I redo that? We're not expecting anything, but it doesn't hurt. And if nothing else, if a student came up to me and asked about that, and I saw a demonstrated interest and motivation, let's say they finished with a 79, I'd be inclined to bump them up to a B, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, right? Whereas if it was a student who really didn't care at all and was bad attitude and never came to office hours or emailed me or expressed any concern about their grade, well, their 79 is probably going to stay a C, because my impression is they don't care, right? So teachers are people too, remember that. Use the internet within reason. If there are study guides or syllabi, definitely use those. Tutoring can help. And then if you can find a study partner or small group that is similarly motivated, then that's also great. That'll learn how to identify who to ask, and then when and how. It is a kind of an art, right? Because if a teacher, you can tell they're really overwhelmed and they're not in a good mood, then maybe coming to them right after class is not the best idea. So maybe let's shoot them an email and ask, is there a time that we can meet? Or can I send you a couple questions by email? Right. And then it's not always teachers. It may be a fellow student, right? Or maybe someone who graduated from that same class or same school or took the class in previous years. We can coach people on self-advocacy. I think we're just, as a society, aren't very good at asking for help. When we are reviewing, when you schedule it, and I do think you should schedule it, look at how to put that on a calendar. Make sure you're also scheduling breaks and make them mini sessions, like we said, not big blocks. A lot of executive function coaches like these, like 11 by 17 big old calendars. So you just have them up on the wall and you've got everything written out. Some students do great with that. So maybe print it out, or if you've got an exam schedule emailed to you, definitely print that. Make sure you have it in different spots. Put it in your phone too. I'm on Google Calendar for everything, right? So all my in-person stuff is in red and all my work stuff is in blue. And I love that this person scheduled in breaks, because if you don't, that 3 to 3:30 it's gonna disappear really fast, right? So just making sure that you're not being unrealistic with how much time you're setting aside. Be gentle with yourself. That way, also in Google Calendar, I know, hey, my last final isn't until June 1st. I've got a project due June 4th, right? So here are the things that I need to do in between those, and that'll help me schedule. Right, so it's all just about planning ahead and keeping it organized. This would probably be for like a college freshman who's taking executive function coaching and understands how to schedule in sleep time and break time. So take a look at this example. There are tests on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 5 tests in 4 days. So you can see most of the first couple days is spent on history and chemistry, but not all of it. There was some Spanish, there was some math, there was even some English. So the tests that are on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, this person isn't just saving those for Tuesday and Wednesday. That would be crazy. We need to sleep on those days. We need to recover. We need some coffee. So we want to have already studied for those some and just have to review. Right. So this is a really nice job of building in those breaks. One mnemonic device or acronym, which we'll talk about, is GOAT, greatest of all time, or in this case, the greatest study plan of all time. G would be for setting goals. So G is for goals that are attainable and specific. If you're meeting with a coach, you usually want like one safe goal and one stretch goal. So like we meet on Monday, by Thursday, I would want to say, hey, let's complete these 3 missing assignments. That's our safe goal. Stretch goal is, let's see if we can raise our grade from an 83 to an 86 based on the test this week. And then if it doesn't happen, we celebrate the successes that were there, look at what didn't go right, and frame it from a lens of curiosity. But realistic, specific goals. O is for organization. I think this is something that most high school students really struggle with. Most of my students for sure. And even when I was high school, I think I did as well. You got to have a place where everything lives in terms of assignments and homework and notebooks. You should have routines. You want to make sure you always have access to the tools you need. And then again, when we're organizing and structuring our study time, we need to make sure we actually schedule on the calendar, right? So that's a big part of getting ready for finals. A, review here, but it's distractions, remove them. We cannot multitask. We need short breaks, and we just can't get sucked into long breaks, right? So A is for maintaining attention on the work. And finally, T is for testing, which we'll talk about more. This is probably the most important one. So again, if you have an essay in class and you know there's a few topics, you probably want to write practice essays, or at least start them and write out your thesis and some body paragraphs. Teach it to yourself, or teach it to a pet or a friend, right, or a parent, right? Just showing that you can teach it demonstrates mastery. So like, that's when I know someone's great at SAT or ACT, is if they can teach the content back to me. Like, oh, okay, now you're going to be fine. This is Kathleen Kreese's chunk chew check method. The reason that we break things up and don't do long blocks of studying is because learning is suboptimal if you do that. Every 10 minutes we learn something new, we need a couple minutes to process that, right? Which is why, like, even a presentation like this, there's so much information I'm trying to get across. So then at the end, it's like, well, let me think back through it, look at my notes, and there would be things that I would unpack, right? Even every time I presented, I learned something a bit new. And then what we want to do is check, right? So we have a chunk of material, we chew on that for a moment, and then we check it by testing, right? Verify that we actually know it. That's a mistake math teachers often make, is they don't verify that students understand, and then they test them on it and people are confused, right? If we have checked that, right, as a class or even as an individual, then we can safely move on to the next topic. So as we approach these couple weeks leading into finals, I want to look specifically at just what can we do that will help you be more effective. Jed and really EF coaches and everyone in this field is big on generation and constructing. So whether it's a coach teaching it, a lot of students are very visual and do better with visual memory than verbal. If you're trying to learn something for a final, you might need to draw it out, right? Even if it's like for history, I remember in my high school, we learned it by flow charts, which is kind of an interesting way, but it was one thing led to another, and then these feedback cycles, and that led to that. It was a little bit reductive, but I could see how in any class, drawing that diagram would help link to the big picture, right? So we're trying to anchor our understanding. Whether that's anchoring it to information we already have, or information we've just learned, or new information, right? I think drawing things out can be really big. So oftentimes it's just having pencil in hand and moving. And we've talked about breaking things up. So the more you have to remember something, the better. But this is where testing comes in. So again, using the example of just a short answer question or an essay. I could look at the essay question and say to myself, yes, I understand it. Yes, I can do it. But that is different from actually sitting down and writing it. Because when I do that, I'm going to realize, ooh, actually, my thesis isn't perfect. I have one example, my second two aren't very good for my body paragraphs. And that is testing. That is showing, okay, if I actually had to generate this in class, this is the roadblock I'm going to hit. I ran out of time on my last paragraph when I timed it, right? So these are things that you really need to practice a lot for standardized tests, but also for finals and just in school generally, right? That helps us cement and counters that Ebbinghaus forgetting effect. And when we say quality over quantity in this case, what we mean is that you're better off working through something deeply once or twice than super surface level with sports or music or TV in the background 15 times. So there's this balance. You don't want to just do it one time for a long time, but you do want to deeply work through material several times for 45 minutes, right? And you don't want to do it like 20 times for 5 minutes each because that's less effective. So several types, several review sessions, deep processing, better attention. You can see here the effectiveness of various techniques of learning. The most effective by far are practice testing, which is what we just said. So like showing that you could teach it, and then distributed practice rather than blocked practice. So over time so that you can reinforce, right, and space things out. Whereas little things like rereading the teacher's perfect notes or highlighting or underlining things, summarizing can help, but it's probably not going to be the most effective final review technique. A little more on testing here. The goal of it is to lock in our learning, to really encode things in our brain, and we do that by forcing ourselves to retrieve certain memories or certain facts. And in doing that, if we do it enough, it helps us adjust the synaptic connections. How do we do it? So when you're thinking about how to prove mastery, when we're testing, we're either teaching somebody else. So maybe you've got a study group and you're teaching a friend, they're teaching you back. Asking yourself questions, that's just self-teaching, or somebody else, ideally, or the pet or the mirror. Flashcards, some people really benefit from. Self-quizzing, so meaning like maybe there's certain sections that are harder, right? So you've got like questions in one spot, but not the answers. So that's kind of like flashcards. Making sure that as you walk through, you can explain it to yourself, right? I remember doing a lot of that in law school. And then some teachers actually allow note sheets or note cards for a final. Definitely know if you've got an open book test. Either way, making that little note sheet for review can help because you're writing it down and that helps encode. I think we've established this, but is it better to block study or distribute the studying over time? The answer is definitely the mixed practice. Distribute it over time. And look at the people who did that. The ones who did block practice, while they were practicing, they did great. 90% of questions right, 90% accurate. But 1 week later, they lost almost all of it. Remembered only 20% of what they learned. During practice, the mixers, the ones who kind of chunked it up into different slots, didn't actually know as much, but 1 week later, they had more. They retained it and then some. Right, so I think that says it all. If you're cramming for a test, maybe during the practice, you're gonna be okay, but even by that next morning, you're gonna have forgotten a lot of it. That's why cramming isn't always an effective strategy. This is review, but I just think it's important enough. We'll put it in again. So it's the balance of you don't want to spend too long, but you do need to switch. So switch it up, but don't spend too long on any one task. And then more beginnings and endings means you have to be very conscious about what you're doing. So like, don't sink into something that's a big time suck. We talk a lot about active learning and active reading. So passive would be, people often start out on any test, kind of like that, right? And then that becomes this, which often then becomes that. And that's no good. We're not going to be at our best there, right? We're tired, body language is going to reflect that, and results usually are reflected in that. So better would be pen or pencil in hand and doing, again, your own thing, where maybe even underlining or circling and taking your own notes. But the more we paraphrase, the better. Just getting a perfect copy of the teacher's notes isn't that helpful because it's not a struggle. It's just this kind of perfect template. So if we are more active, the learning and the knowledge will stick much more often. Some more strategies just to think about, right? It's not one size fits all. So these will work for some people and maybe not for others. But we talked about drawing out concept maps. So maybe there's something that you don't quite understand in the history class and why it's significant. So sometimes just drawing that out and drawing connections helps. If you've been provided a study guide, wonderful, but creating your own could be even better, right? Or even just annotating the one that's given. Outlining just means making your own order. So paraphrasing and taking simple notes. Making sure that we know what might show up. So we don't want to be surprised by anything. We want to know exactly what to expect on the test. Want to make sure we've got, like, if the test is you're supposed to take some sort of strong stance, right? Make sure that you have some examples of pros and cons, right? Or maybe decide on which stance you'll take if it's a test like that. If it's a textbook with end of chapter questions, look at those, right? See if there's any major themes or things the teachers have mentioned, right? Hey, we're probably going to test this. By the end of the year, we should have a pretty good idea of what will be on the final. And then there's also different strategies for memorizing things. So we talked about deep versus shallow, deep being better. Visual encoding, so pictures, even like when I'm talking in an SAT session, we'll always have the book or the problem up there so we can mark up the screen. Mnemonics, which is on the next slide we'll talk about, or acrostics like PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, for order of operations in math. We talked about self-testing and forced retrieval. Those are the best ones, right? So really just forcing yourself to understand, to see if you understand it, right? Do I really know this like I think I do? I guess the mnemonic is like 2 slides later. So how to improve memorization. We have to link things. So a lot of times people have ideas floating around, and even within one class or one final exam prep, there's a bunch of ideas, but they don't connect together well enough. I don't understand how this unit connects to that unit, connects to that unit. And this is no good for comprehension. But when we link ideas, right, together into one overarching idea, hopefully, that will help us memorize them. That really helps us lock that in. And so back to mnemonics, it is a tough word to say and spell. But if you need to remember how to spell it, remember that M comes before N. That would be an easy way to remember it. There is no mnemonic device too silly or corny. If it works for you, then it works. So Katoa is a weird one. PEMDAS is one. EGBDF, Roy G. Biv. There's rhyme and alliteration. I learned the quadratic formula to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. That's a device. A lot of people still do that, I think. Vocab, right? So word roots, or like decorous, kind of like being, so decorous and decorations being similar words, right? So there are a lot of different things, and there is no one right way. If it helps you memorize it, then it's good. I've learned some of my coolest ones from students just over the years. So there's one that comes up on ECT, SAT a lot, that's affect versus effect. And a lot of people just don't remember. The student taught me RAVEN, which stands for remember that affect is a verb and effect is a noun. There's other ways to remember that, but I always thought that was pretty cool. So then if I could just remember RAVEN, then I'm never going to miss affect, effect again. Affect's the verb, effect's the noun. So that's a mnemonic that can help, and there's ones for every single topic, every single thing. A lot of students with dyslexia or learning differences really benefit from these because it's really unique to their mental pathway. We want to kind of gear it towards whatever works best for us. When we're reviewing notes for finals, which is one of the first things we want to do when studying, some people really benefit from color coding. So maybe like events is one color, concepts is another. When it's talking about famous people, that's another. Or for math, we could do yellow for formulas, green for vocab, and red for proofs. That can really just help people separate things, but also link them in weird ways too. When we're self-testing and reviewing notes, here are some questions you should be asking. So what is the topic? Who's involved? When, where, why, how? Look at all those who, what, where, when, why, how questions. Right? So those are all the things you want to be asking, just like when we're thinking about the way we think. but then same with each individual final. And ideally, if you're generating or writing out answers, that's going to be what really separates, I think, the B students from the A students. Because someone can be really confident that, okay, I know the topic, I know who, when, where, why, how, but if I didn't start to actually write it like I will on the test, it's not going to be as easy on test day. And I won't encounter the pitfalls until that moment, which is too late. So write it out. If you can force yourself to do that, that's the best type of study. Then going into final exam battle, know your opponent. What is this exam going to cover? You don't want to have any blind spots if possible. Sometimes calculus and physics can be really tough because the teachers kind of hide the ball. So as much as we can try to figure it out, right, it's what is the format and the syllabus? What type of questions are we going to have? How many? Is it all multiple choice or written? If it's a math test, do I get partial credit for a correct step or do I need to get it completely right? These are all things that are important to know, because if it's a math problem and you can't get there, but you know you can get halfway, you only need to do that if you're going to get credit. If not, move to something different. So thinking ahead, knowing exactly what's coming. We talked about looking to other classmates or people who've taken the class in the past. Go to office hours and don't be nervous to ask the teacher just what's the best way to prepare, right? Most teachers are approachable, I think, and would answer that. I would say if you are nervous to ask that teacher, that's not a good sign about that teacher's personality, but a lot of people are just naturally uncertain about that. I would say within reason, the more the better, as long as you're demonstrating your own motivation and, I guess, dedication to putting in the effort to succeed. But if a student came up to me and said, hey, what's the best way to prepare? I would help them. And I would take note that that person asked and cared. I think most teachers would agree. Other final things before the test. So can you move freely from one section to another and back? Usually yes, but like on SAT, ACT, no. How much information, what's the range that we need to know? Is it okay to have things separately, or do I need to know how they connect and interlink? Again, how the rubric is, if there's a grading rubric. And then also, if you've got goals, we want to know how important this test is. Is it 30% of my overall grade? What do I need to actually shoot for to get my A or my B or whatever? And so getting into just towards test day itself, what it is it's you against the material against time, right? So all these tests are going to be in some sort of timed format, almost always. The 50-10 rule we mentioned is when you're studying, you don't want to be doing more than about, I go 30, 45 minutes, but no more than 50 minutes at a time, and then take 10 minutes off. Limit distractions. So that's usually the phone. And again, music with words, most people cannot study well with that. Rare exceptions, but usually like classical or background music or nothing at all. So finally, what are we doing now? Well, this is a just example class. Got my class notes. That's my first thing, right? Hopefully I've taken these good notes from the lectures all year, different for different schools or different classes, but I've got these class notes, worksheets, all this stuff. Study guide is going to be huge. A lot of teachers provide one towards the end of the year. So make sure, hey, this is what I don't know yet. Find those out. If there's a textbook, third step would be review it. Don't try to read a whole book, but look at the graphs, look at the end of chapter questions. Focus on little things that can anchor you, and then make sure you're looking at topics that when you first reviewed, the ones that you were like, ooh, I don't feel great about that. Right? So first shore up those. If you're finding like, okay, I think I know this, don't be a perfectionist. You got to move on. A lot of people take too long because they're just reviewing, and kind of beating a dead horse. They already know it. Focus only on topics from the study guide or the units you did. Try not to do anything that is extraneous. And then if it is going to be like an essay question, but you're not sure what they'll ask, think about what were the biggest focuses over the course of the semester. What might the teacher really be passionate about or ask you to write about? And then last is review those notes one more time. So we don't look at the notes. We've kind of made our own study guide or reviewed it if there is one. We've looked at the textbook, and then fourth is back to the notes. So, okay, these things I wasn't sure of, now I'm sure of. oh wait, still don't know this. So it's a little bit of back and forth at that point. And maybe if the text doesn't answer it, that's when you reach out to a classmate. Maybe you missed a day and they have notes that will help you. And just to reiterate for the final time, the more you write things down, the better you'll remember them, the more you generate. I know as a high school student, I would have been hard pressed to practice writing essays for my essay test, but I also know I would have done a whole lot better if I had done that. If you have a partner who's on the same wavelength, same motivation level and effort level, it's not a distraction. Working with a partner studying is great, right? Usually if it's a big friend group, a lot of study people, that's not ideal, but one person, two people can be really awesome. And then right before the test, we've had this schedule, we've stuck to it. We haven't gone hours and hours at a time without taking breaks. We've written things down in advance of the test. We're organized, we know what to expect. When we learned something and felt like I know it pretty well, we moved on. We came back across hours and days for repetition so that it would really get sunken in. And then with extra time, we just review, right? Not new work, but reviewing things to just learn them one more time. Final bit here is strategies for test day. We're going to end with probably two or 3 minutes, maybe 4 for questions. So if you do have some, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. But home stretch here. When you're going in for your finals, whether you've got 1 that day or 2 or 3, bring what you need. What's allowed, right? Do you get calculators? Do you get to bring a note card with something on it and formulas? Because if so, you better bring one, or else it's going to be a really hard test unnecessarily. If you're still doing online or virtual testing, right? What can we bring and what can we not? So I always lay out a checklist before the ACT, SAT of what do we bring? ID, admissions ticket, snack, water, pencil, calculator, warm clothes, right? Just making sure you've got that all laid out the day before. Then finally, eat right, sleep right. If you usually don't eat a big breakfast, in normal school day, maybe don't do it on final exam day. But generally, eating a nice protein-filled breakfast is good. You want to make sure that you've got adrenaline and energy going, and a little bit of stress is okay. And generally, the night before the test is the most important night's sleep, which is hard to process. But like for a Saturday test, you need to get a good night's sleep on Thursday so that your rhythms are set for Friday. I think the number one most important thing beyond all the stuff we've talked about is getting good rest and sleep the week of the tests, which is like people are not doing that because they never get good rest junior year. It's really awful. And not getting sick. And those kind of go hand in hand. Because if people are exhausted or sneezing, coughing, that just makes everything so much tougher. So the final tips for the next couple of weeks: study sessions with people if possible. Checkpoints. So making sure that we're measuring progress. Right now it's early May, our tests are usually end of May. Think about if the plan's working, and if not, how you can change. And if things aren't working perfectly, be kind to yourself. I have a lot of students who get discouraged really easily. It's like, oh, I studied for this test, I didn't do well, right? And we kind of build off that negative experience. So it's hard, but you got to avoid that negative spiral. And a lot of times breaking it up is helpful. And then like, even when you're working with a coach, it can be really hard to find a system that works, right? Because what worked for me doesn't work for most of my students and vice versa. So as you're thinking about what systems work, don't expect to get it right. It's like finding the right medications to be on. It's a process, especially if you've had trouble in the past. It's not something that just clicks in. It's a journey, right? Framed from a lens of curiosity. All right, we are going to launch a quick poll. And I see a couple questions coming in already, which is great. The one thing that I want to mention as that poll launches is something new that we're doing is executive function coaching. We've been doing it for a couple of years now. This is usually like 30-minute sessions once or twice per week. And the goal is for like a coach like me to help. Sometimes it's juniors in high school, often. Sometimes it's middle schoolers or college freshmen who just might have skills they want to develop, whether that's planning, prioritizing, organizing, or all of the above. The cool thing here is if you do a diagnostic, you can get a mind print exam, which is like a mock test for your brain. It tells people about their strengths and weaknesses and some learning tips for what can help boost those skills. That's a cool new thing we're doing. And that does it for the presentation. We've got a few minutes for questions. If you feel like you don't have any and want to take off for the evening, please feel free, but I'm going to leave it open for just a couple minutes since that was a lot of information today. And if you do have questions, not for me, but generally, the AppleRuth website is great, just appleruth.com, and you can email this email below or call the number there. Couple questions. One is, how can you practice executive function during the summer? I mean, one way is to do it with a coach, but even if you weren't, I really think a lot of it is reflection. So like if it was me over the summer, I'd look at what went really well in the past semester and what didn't. And maybe the one or two classes, let's say I had a couple classes where I didn't do as well in, I would really dive into that. And I would just start to, again, that curiosity, think about, ask myself questions, right? Like, why did that final not go well? Or what was the grade that really cost me in that class? If I was going to do it again, what would I do differently? So a lot of, if it's during the summer, I think a lot of it's reflection. And then thinking ahead, if I know what classes I'm taking the following year, especially like if math has been an issue, and you know that the math class next year is you moving from pre-calc to calculus. A really good way to practice would be just doing practice questions, looking at topics that either you've learned or you're going to learn, and then just kind of playing with it. I think everyone's different, right? So it's really just, if you set aside the time to think about the way you think, then you're just naturally going to do it. The only other thing I could say during the summer is you can do things like decluttering your environment. So really make sure your digital and physical space is really disciplined so that you know your best workspace, right? And have that. You're very welcome. Procrastination without motivation. What do I suggest? Super, super common, right? Where these students are just, gosh, like not only am I putting it off to the last minute, you get the vibe that they just don't even care if they turn it in or what grade they get on it. What I found a lot, like almost always, is when someone's not motivated, that's actually what it's presenting as, but really what's going on is a lack of skill, like literally almost always. So what's happening is, I don't care, but really it's what underlies that is, I don't feel confident that I can do well. And sometimes we're stacking ourselves up to other people. Sometimes it's just internal lack of motivation because we don't feel, effective enough or as good as others. So what I suggest if someone is experiencing lack of motivation and putting stuff off, it's a journey again, but it's about getting to the bottom of why. And I really do think it's probably almost always going to boil down to, yep, I don't like this teacher and I don't understand the class. I feel lost in this class, and or I'm not doing as well as other people who are working less hard. So I would just delve into it a little bit, maybe even do like a diagnostic with a counselor or a coach. But yeah, those are just some suggestions. All right, we're at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for joining and have a wonderful rest of the week.